Good evening again, Gordon Causey, Gordy Canuck. I had said I did a video, I think 2 nights ago on Tuesday, talking about the fact that the World Health Organization was meeting on Thursday, which was just a couple hours ago. I'm in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, where it is now 1:01 a.m. And so Thursday, there was a meeting of the World Health Organization, specific committee that was meeting to declare monkeypox a public health emergency of international concern. So I had been anticipating that there would be some form of an announcement today, either saying yes, it is a global emergency, or no, it's not. And neither happened. They haven't declared it a global health emergency, and they haven't said that it is not a global health emergency. I'm going to read directly from the World Health Organization's own website, which is who.int. And this is a news item that came out Thursday, the 23rd, a news release, very short. The Director General of the Director General of WHO, is convening an emergency committee under Article 48 of the International Health Regulations in relation to the current outbreak of monkeypox virus. The meeting will take place on 23 June 2022 and is open only to members and advisors of the emergency committee. The objectives of this meeting are to provide views to the Director General of WHO on whether the event constitutes a public health emergency of international concern, and also on proposed potentially temporary recommendations. And that's the end. And it gives you a list of the participants, chair, co-chair, advisors, and so on. And find it disconcerting that no announcement was made. One thing that Canadians may be aware of, Dr. Theresa Tam, who is Canada's Chief Medical Officer of Health, she is an advisor to this committee. And I believe it's the IHR Emergency Committee, and IHR standing for International Health Regulations. And again, Theresa Tam is an advisor. And I think it's more than a year since it came out that she's an advisor to this committee. And apparently she is bound by a confidentiality agreement. She is not allowed to discuss anything that is discussed or anything that's talked about during those committee meetings. It would seem to me that her first allegiance is to the World Health Organization, and secondary to that is her role as Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, or Chief Medical Health Officer. And if the WHO enacts, takes measures that are not in Canada's best interest, we'll never know about it. Apparently, we can expect, I'm anticipating that something will come out Friday. That's today. There's another article that I've referenced in the description by CTV News. And I'm going to only read one line of that. It says the WHO said it did not expect to announce any decisions made by its emergency committee before Friday. So reading between the lines, if we're not expecting anything to be released before Friday, I'm thinking Friday is the day. And to reiterate some of the things I said in my most recent video a couple of days ago on Tuesday, that a public health emergency of international concern, this PHEIC declaration, has ramifications. There are consequences, things that would ensue if that designation is given. And the letter, the news release put out by World Health intimated about it. They said they were discussing whether or not to make the declaration that monkeypox is a global health emergency, and also on proposed potential temporary recommendations. Two words there: potential means maybe, maybe not, and temporary. Well, if they're potential temporary recommendations, are the recommendations potential? Are these potential recommendations or actual recommendations? Or are they potentially temporary or potentially permanent? It's a little ambiguous in my view, because as I understand it, one of the biggest things that would happen in the wake or in the aftermath of a public health emergency declaration is that testing would ramp up significantly. And that brings with it the prospect that all of a sudden we could see cases going up. And then perhaps, as we saw with COVID, perhaps it could lead to monkeypox being declared a pandemic. And again, to reiterate what I said on Tuesday, late Tuesday evening, is that COVID, or SARS-CoV-2, or the novel coronavirus, call it whatever you want, it was declared a public health emergency by the World Health Organization on January 30th of 2020, and no one was paying attention back then. And it wasn't until March 11th, so a month and a bit later, 4 or 5 weeks later, at that point, only then was it declared a pandemic. And then it was a week after the declaration of a pandemic that lockdown style measures were implemented pretty much all over the world, certainly in all of the developed world. About the only outlier at that time was the nation of Sweden. They kept their schools open. They kept their bars, their restaurants, churches. They advised, but they didn't mandate. And so what's going to happen with monkeypox? There was also another disconcerting article written in the CBC, which I haven't linked, but it was published just Thursday. And it was referencing a gentleman who actually had a confirmed case of monkeypox. And it talked about the potential for people being forced into quarantine for a month or more. And as you know, with the COVID pandemic, someone could test positive after a nasal colonoscopy, as I like to call them, a PCR test, an applicator rammed halfway up into someone's brain. And a simple positive test, even if someone had zero symptoms, was 100% perfectly healthy by every measurable indication aside from the PCR test, that person was required to isolate, quarantine. And would it be the same situation again? Would a simple test with a PCR test? And I would invite anyone to go onto YouTube right here. There was a press conference given by Doug Ford, who is and was at that time Ontario's premier. For Americans, a premier is basically the same as a governor. And he was at a press conference, and a reporter asked Doug Ford why the province wasn't doing proactive testing of teachers to get ahead of things, so to speak. And Doug Ford, as he often does, he said, well, I always have to defer to the medical experts. And he said, sorry, Dr. Yaffe, or Jaffe, I'm going to have to ask you to come back up here again. And then Dr. Barbara Yaffe, or Jaffe, she came to the microphone. She is Ontario's Associate Chief Medical Officer of Health. The Chief Medical Health Officer is currently Dr. Kieran Moore. And I believe at the time of this interview, it was Dr. David Williams, but irrespective, she's kind of at least provincially for the province of Ontario, she's number 2 in terms of public health. And she came to the mic and she said, and this is going to be pretty darn near an exact quote. She said, you know, if you test someone today, you only know if they are infected today. And as an aside, basically she was referencing what they refer to as the moment in time. And Doug Ford was standing behind her, nodding his head. And then she said, but if you're testing in an area with very little COVID, you're going to get false positives about half the time. The person might not have COVID. They might have something else. They might have nothing. Now, I invite you to go and just type Dr. Barbara Yaffe. I believe it's YAFFE, Dr. Barbara Yaffe, and type in 50% false positive. And it speaks to the PCR test itself. When it was invented, the gentleman who invented it, and I can't recall his name off the top of my head, and I don't do these things with notes. He is on record as having stated that the PCR test in of itself, in isolation, just the PCR test, should not be used as a diagnostic tool. He said that the PCR test was designed to be part of a diagnosis, but not just the PCR test. Basically, someone comes in presenting symptoms. Well, is it an influenza virus? Is it SARS-CoV-2? Is it another respiratory virus? They don't know. They're trying to nail down the diagnosis. That was when he suggested that's when a PCR test comes into play. You have someone who's displaying overt symptoms of something, and diagnosis can be very difficult. A lot of diseases, even monkeypox, we're told, has a lot of the same symptoms that COVID does. The one exception to we're talking about fatigue, about fever, aches, but similar symptomology. The difference being monkeypox to COVID is sores, pustules, blisters, like chickenpox perhaps, or shingles or whatever. And there was also an article that you can search. It was written back in August of 2020, and it was done by the New York Times. And they interviewed experts with public health experts at Harvard. Harvard has a school of public health, Howard Chen School of Public Health or something like that. It's named after a specific individual. And so they interviewed these Harvard experts, these Harvard medical experts, about PCR tests. And the article said, your COVID test is positive, maybe it shouldn't be. And their view, what the expert opinion that they were expressing, was that the false positive rate could be as high as 90%. And the reason for that is it's a little hard to, it's actually, I believe I'm not an expert, so verify anything I say. I don't like to say I'm guessing, but I'm basing everything on what I have read and what I consider to be, trustworthy sources, New York Times, World Health Organization's own press release, CTV, mainstream reputable sources. So basically what they described is the cycle threshold. And as I understand it, they take a sample, the PCR test, and then they run it through the PCR, and they amplify it. And they amplify it once, twice, 20 times, 30 times. And they're looking for RNA. They're looking for genetic material from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And if they get to 30 and they haven't found it, then they can keep amplifying. And within the article in the New York Times, the Harvard experts were saying that, and I'm trying to remember whether it was 30 or 35, but they said there was a disconnect. Some said we should stop at 30, and I believe others said no higher than 35. And the reason for that being is that what I equate it to is we've all had a picture on our phone or on a computer, and you're trying to zero in on something. What's that in that person's pocket? And so you blow it up bigger and bigger and bigger. But once you blow it up too big, it becomes so distorted that you can't really tell. I would imagine, picture you envision having a picture of 12 people, and you're trying to determine if someone has a gun in their pocket, and you're looking to see if the butt of a gun is sticking out, and so you blow it up so large. Well, the picture becomes so distorted that maybe you see something, maybe you don't know. And I do know that in Ontario, PCR amplification cycles, the cycle threshold, have been set as high as 38 and possibly even 40. And another point that the Harvard experts made in this New York Times article is that the amplification threshold that is hit will determine how infectious a person is. Someone who tests positive after just 20 amplifications is likely to be far more infectious than someone who tests positive at 37, 38, 39 amplifications. And that, but I'm going to invite you simply to go and find the article yourself, because I'm not a public health expert. I don't go to Harvard. I just read what they have to say. So you can search it out. I actually believe the date it was published was August 25th of 2020. And it's your COVID test is positive, maybe it shouldn't be. And then there was a subtitle which spoke to the fact that up to 90% of the positives could be false positives. So I'll invite you to read that article, actually search it out, and I'll add it if I can edit the description to this. Actually, I can do that right now while I jabber. Let's see if I can find the article. The other thing is, so much now, of course, is behind paywalls that an article, sometimes it'll come out and you can read it at the time. And then, weeks or months later or a year later or more, and all of a sudden now it's behind a paywall. I'm just searching. Your COVID test is positive. Maybe it shouldn't be. And there it is, August 30th. So it's off. So I have the article. The usual diagnostic test may simply be too sensitive and too slow to contain the spread of the virus. Remember, this is August. Some of the nation's leading public health experts are raising a new concern in the endless debate over coronavirus testing in the United States. The standard tests are diagnosing huge numbers, and now I just got notification that special offer, get unlimited access for 50 cents Canadian a week. Subscribe now. So I'll put the article up. I'll add it to this, but we'll see tomorrow. We'll see Friday. So I'm going to end it there. Keep it under 20 minutes anyway. I always talk too much, especially late at night. So God bless everyone. We're going to get through this. I do expect that this monkeypox virus, I do expect that they're going to declare it a public health emergency. And then I expect, I think we're going to follow the same basic pattern that was followed with COVID, which would mean, if we do follow the same basic pattern, I'm spitballing that we'll probably get to the end of August, start of September, and that's when we get to the equivalent of March 17th, 18th, when lockdown measures were brought in. So anyway, again, God bless, and we'll talk again probably tomorrow night.